Hello. How's everybody doing this week?
Good. How are you?
Not too bad. Okay, so let's see. Let's just jump in with this week's assignment. If you didn't send, if you haven't sent your glitch project for the week, please do that now. And in future, please do submit that to me before class time, because I like to organize them into a collection so that I can go through them easily. We're gonna start with, okay, so we're gonna start with Sarah's project.
Okay.
So how did this go for you?
It was a little bit difficult, I think, compared to the last one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I could tell from the your
the words.
yeah, the words you wrote.
Yeah, I mean, I just like Googled a lot of things, and then yeah, I think I have a better sense of like the differences between like the relative, absolute, etc. Like all the different, but I'm still a little
modes,
bit, yeah, I'm still like a little bit confused. Like,
okay.
yeah.
Let's look at your code. So we have, it's already looking good. Okay, so you have these, you have a bunch of inline style declarations.
Yes.
And you have class names as well. Okay, so let's just look here, because like sort of the issue that you might run into there is that, yeah, you have is that like rules that you define in your CSS file in that rule definition that's attached to the class name are going to be overridden by anything that goes in this style attribute is going to override what's in your style sheet. So that might have caused some trouble for you. It looks like everything, like, you know, but it's just the same, you know, you're a position static in here and it's overriding position static in here, so it doesn't look like it's messed anything up.
Oh, so you don't actually have to like define the position like in the CSS, like it already, like static is already like defined.
Static is the default, yeah.
Or like relative is also like.
No, I'm talking about, no, what I'm talking about is you have, what I'm talking about is like, so you have style rules written here in your .css file. You also have style rules written here in your HTML.
Okay.
And what I'm saying is that these style, the ones here in the HTML, the ones that here that are written at the HTML level are going to cancel out the ones that are written in the style sheet.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah. So if you look at so for instance, if you look here where it says element.style, these are the rules that are written here in the style attribute, where you have position static, width 200, height 100. That's this stuff. Then down here, this is what's written in CSS. You can see it tells you what line number, style.css:24. If you click that, it'll link you right to that place in the style sheet. And you can see that position static is crossed out It's crossed out
Got it.
because it's being, because this is overriding it, because this is canceling it.
Okay.
That's just something to be aware of. The reason that I use inline, basically inline styles like this, like the style attribute, really should only be used if you're planning on changing those values on the fly. That's the reason that I use them in my examples a lot, because I manipulate them just manually. But the kind of the more standard use case for those is stuff that's going to get manipulated using JavaScript, and we're going to talk about how to do that later in a couple weeks.
Okay.
But otherwise, but I mean, that's that's just a nitpick. Otherwise, this is coming along nicely. It seems like you sort of have a grasp on. Let's see, this one. Okay. Yep. And you did the.
Yeah, so I included I think both in the HTML and CSS because I was referring to your code, and then I was also trying to figure out how to do it in CSS. So I thought we had to do it in both.
No, it's one or the other.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
But also just so the style attribute is going to, it will always take precedence over what's in a style sheet. It'll always override a style sheet.
Okay.
But and then yep, this one. Okay, so the Flexbox was right. Let's see. Okay. Let's see what your style sheet looks like. Let's continue. It looks like the only flex property you really played with was the direction.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all right. It's just sort of it becomes a lot, where this really gains a lot of power is in
Oh, you kind of lost. Oh.
Yeah, that's part of the idea. Right. Okay. Yeah, that's part of the whole power behind the Flexbox is that it allows you to take items of arbitrary size and irregular size and display them uniformly. That's something that was much harder to do before the Flexbox was implemented.
Got it.
Okay.
Okay.
Still, yep. This is stuff that just. Sorry, go ahead.
What does the justify content do?
Justify content justifies it vertically. So it's sort of not really changing as much because because the Flex container. Let's do this. Let's see, what height is it computing at? It's computing to. computing to 866. So let's just make it 1200 pixels high. So now, see how
Oh,
justify content is centering it? If I change that to space between, now it's going to evenly space everything horizontal, vertically.
okay. But before you like define the height of the flex box, that the height of the flex box was just
Equal to the content inside
equal
it.
to the content. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep, it's only as high, a container is only as high as, or a container's height is equal to whatever content is inside of it until you define it.
Fine. Okay.
Okay, cool, nicely done. Yeah,
So when would you use like a fixed like box? Like I
fixed,
was so confused. Yeah.
fixed
'Cause there was
positioning.
this- uh-huh.
Well, for instance, here, this little glitch widget on the top, something like, for instance, a navigation element that you want to always stay in the same place, regardless of when you're of where you are on the page. There are two. Fixed positioning is the way to do that. There's also a sticky nav or a sticky positioning mode that that we can cover briefly. I'll just like next week is is another lab day, or is our first lab day, and I'll make sure to cover sticky positioning. What sticky positioning does is allow you to define things to like stick to the top of the screen once you scroll to a certain point. That's another thing that didn't used to be built into CSS, and like you had to kind of hack your way into it, but now there's just a way to do it. But yeah, the idea of fixed position is just things that need to stay anchored to the edges of the viewport and not scroll.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So then, tell you what, let me just open all of these. Okay. So Henrika.
Yeah.
I
had a couple of issues. I could not get the Flexbox to work, and
Okay.
also the media query.
Sure.
Yeah, I have no idea why.
Okay. I have.
And I also I have some style rules in the HTML. I also got confused about that.
Okay. Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, as long as sort of you understand sort of that they're going to override what's in a style sheet.
Yeah.
Let me see. Okay. So one thing I'm actually kind of a little, I'm not sure, I can't remember if I mentioned this or not when I was covering media queries last week, but you always have to have this line of code you have to have this meta tag in the head of your document in order for the media query to work properly. The meta name equals viewport, content equals width equals device width, initial scale equals 1. What this does is if you think back to like, when iPhones first came out, like, or smartphones first came out, like sort of 15 odd years ago, and you went to a web page on your phone, it would appear super zoomed out, right? It would just be, it would be zoomed out to fit on the screen that it served on, and then you would sort of pinch in to zoom in. This tag tells the browser not to do that. That browser tells you the width of the page is equal to the width of the device, and you scale it 1 to 1. Don't zoom it in or out. This is so if this meta tag isn't present in the head of your document, the media queries won't work right. I don't remember if I I have a slight paranoid feeling that I forgot to mention that last class, but that is an important thing with media queries.
Mhm.
But let's go here. Okay, so we have. Yep, we have something relative positioned. We have something fixed positioned, I can see. Is this section here with these boxes where you were doing the flex box?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to do. And I wanted them to go after the second header.
Okay,
But yeah,
I can.
I don't know what happened there.
I see a problem right off the top of my head, which is you've put a closing tag at the beginning instead. So you have a slash here that you shouldn't have. It should look like that.
Oh,
And now, yeah, so I think that
okay.
fixed it actually. Let's.
But still, I wanted it to go underneath the header.
Well,
Like
oh
the
yeah,
title.
okay. Well, let's see how it's being positioned. Because maybe you have a. It's entirely possible that you have. Well, actually, let's look at this. I think that it has to do with. Remember that the absolute and fixed positioning remove these elements completely from their natural flow in the document. So the container only actually takes up this much space on the page, which is why the, although still the, let's see. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. So, right. All right. When you, so you gave the H2 relative positioning.
Yeah, I did that because I wanted it to go like now I understand why it wasn't doing that, but I wanted it to go like underneath everything else.
Right.
But okay,
So,
that was removed. But so how can I like if I
so
give that relative positioning, how can I then
how
add
about,
the flex block?
yeah, how about instead of, so you want everything that comes after the container to be pushed down on the page, right?
Yes.
Okay, in that case, rather than putting, because the thing is, if you do position like this, in order to put this underneath it, you need to add relative positioning to this and then to everything that follows it. So,
Okay.
but instead of that, if you want to just, if what you want is just to add distance between the bottom edge of this container and everything that comes behind it, you can just add a margin on the bottom. And so now what this is doing,
Okay.
what that's doing is just adding gutter space between the end of the first container and then the start of the next element after it.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
And you said you were having trouble with the media query as well?
Yeah. And I'm not sure if I implemented it the right way. So I rewatched the lecture from last week, and you had like this extra responsive CSS document. So I tried to edit there, but
Yeah, but you didn't include it.
Oh. Okay, that makes sense. Sorry.
Honestly, it's a lot of times it's gonna be something like when you're trying to troubleshoot, it's gonna be something that simple. Like I have, I've been writing code semi-professionally for the last like 12 years or so, and I still do this all the time. Like I still always make dumb mistakes like that.
Okay, yeah, I really couldn't figure it out, and I don't know, like, but thank you.
Yeah, so now browser window bigger here. Oh, let me refresh the page. Okay, it's loading the style sheet. Okay. So the other thing here, you're trying to add this rule to just change the background of the whole page, right? Of the whole body?
Yes.
Okay. So your selector is a little malformed here. You've written a class selector here. Like that's what the dot means, is that you're searching for something with that class name. But what you want here is the element name.
Oh, okay.
So now we should see Yep. Yep, we're seeing that change now.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. So Daphne.
Sorry, I was unmuting myself. Yeah, I had a little bit of trouble with this. I think I may need to go back in. I put all my styles in line, and I think I should go back and put it in the sheet. And also, I think it was kind of hard. I was like I was setting it up, but I guess I wasn't really. I think it seems like it's more helpful if you can think of a use case. So maybe I should go back and kind of work on this. But yeah, I did try to add everything that was required.
Okay. Yeah. Well, maybe in future when I assign this, I can make it a little, when I do this assignment in future semesters, I can make it a little bit more real world realistic instead of just kind of exercisey. But let's
Well, it could be a good exercise maybe to think of a different use case for each one of these.
Sure. Sort of like just think of like when would you want to use relative versus static versus fixed positioning. Okay, yeah. Hang on. Let me make a note of that. Okay. Yep, we have, okay. Okay, here, let's see what you're, Okay, so all right, one thing that's gonna kind of trip you up here with respect to absolute positioning is that you have an ID on this container, on this div, but you don't have any style rules attached to it.
Yeah, I should put it as a padding or something, I'm guessing, or a margin.
Well, I mean, that's entirely up to you, but really, the issue that you're going to run into is that absolute positioning doesn't work unless its parent has a defined position of its own. Like absolute positioning only works if if the parent element or containing element is relative or is itself relative positioned or absolute positioned. So once I add,
What would be the use case for that, I guess?
so I mean, honestly, off the top of my head, the only answer I can really the only answer I can really give you is sort of like if it's what the design calls for. Certain times when you're building a UI, you need to if you're building something that's very kind of like a button interface, like say you're building, you're laying out like a custom media player or something with like custom play, pause, and stop buttons. Chances are you're going to need to position those things with a great deal of you're going to need to position those elements with like a great deal of accuracy, and that you're probably going to want to absolute position everything inside that player so that as it moves around, so that it can move around a page, be anywhere on a page, and everything inside it retains the same position. In the case, you're also, that's also a situation where you don't want text rules, sort of like lines of text, to be sort of breaking up the way things flow with each other. You want to ignore text flow in that situation, right? So that's an area that would be a use case for absolute positioning. If you need to accommodate text flow and position things around text flow, that's where you would use either static or relative positioning. And if you need to ignore document flow completely and just bolt things to the edges of the browser window, that's where you and just leave them fixed there. That's what fixed positioning is for. But so here, in order for some of these other position modes to work properly, the container needs to itself have relative positioning. So now, the other thing is you've given each of these things relative, because you've given them all position rules, but you haven't set, you've given them positioning modes, but then you haven't set actual positions for them. You haven't given them top or left or right or bottom values. So kind of like they're not going to like display the behavior that is emblematic of these position modes until you actually give them a so if I go,
because I think that the first size, which is in the second div, is like on top of stuff in the first container.
Sorry, say that again.
Like that, I think I labeled them like size 1, size 2, size 3, and like that's like on top of the relative one, I think, or fixed one. Yeah, well, again, fixed position, it's bolted to the edges of the browser window, right? So it stays in the same place. So no matter where you scroll the page, that element always floats on top of whatever there. Got it. And you're saying that's like maybe if you want to add like a sticky for like a sticky menu or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you have, or you have a nav bar that should always be across the top of the page, no matter how, like, say the masthead of a newspaper site, something like that. Think of a site like Facebook or Twitter, where there's sort of like, on Facebook, it's vertically across the top of the page. On Twitter, it's horizontally, on Facebook, it's horizontally across the top of the page. On Twitter, it's vertically along the left-hand side. but there's a bar that has like, so, you know, your log in, log out buttons and sort of settings menu. And as you scroll, that always stays fixed, you know? Those are all examples of like where you would use a fixed position element.
And I have seen those too, where you can close them.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Yeah, but that's what you're doing there is you're just when you close those things down, they'll minimize to a smaller version, right? Or they'll either disappear entirely, but there will be a widget to pull them back up. What you're doing, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but what's happening there is on that click event, you're using a little bit of JavaScript to just update the CSS and hide the thing. And then when you click another thing, and then when you click to open it up again, you just do the reverse. It's like, usually you're just adding and removing a class that just, a CSS class that just makes things invisible.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
But notice how sort of, if I take this rule out of here, like sort of, if I don't have any dimensions defined for this, actually, let's do top 0 pixels just so that I can really drive this point home a little more. If I don't have dimensions defined for this, it just stays, it's absolute position, but it still just stays basically where it was in Flow. The major difference is that now all of a sudden it's not, well, it's been removed from Flow because you can see that it's like, that this is sliding up underneath it. But it's in the same place that it was. And you can see that it doesn't, but you can also see that it no longer takes up the full width of its container. Those are your real only clues that this thing is in absolute position mode. But as soon as I give it a top value, now it's glued to the top of the page. Why is it? But that's because this is like as you had it before without this position relative on the container. Absolute positioning will look for the nearest parent that it can base its position on. And in order to base its position, like that parent container needs to be either itself absolute or relatively positioned. If it doesn't find anything, it's going to go all the way out to the level of the body. So what it's doing here is attaching, when I say 0 pixels at this point, it's attaching itself to the top of the page. Now, you can see it's attaching itself to like the top edge of the web page itself. Now, as soon as I turn relative positioning back on for this container, see how it snaps down, and now 0 pixels refers to the top edge of this container. Does this make sense? Is this this is very, very finicky stuff. It takes a long time to get the hang of this. So it's going to be, it took me a very long time to get the hang of, really get the hang of positioning. It's one of the most unforgiving and finicky and unintuitive things in the way CSS works, in my opinion. But I hope this is at least like, you know, there's a lot of detail going on here, but I hope this is making some sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think
Okay.
maybe like the best thing to do is for me is to go back and kind of like rethink it and like work
Sure.
through the assignment again, and maybe like second time I'll sort of
Yeah.
grasp it better. But yeah, no, this is helpful.
Well,
it does seem complicated.
yeah. Well, also bear in mind that sort of like, one of the things I'm going to have you do for next week is the halfway point through our semester. So for next week, I'm going to ask you to come up with a concept for a website you'd like to build for your final project. And that's a case where you can sort of like have a little bit more of a real, like a slightly more applied real world type application of this technique. But so the other thing is that you've got a flex box here, but everything in it is all the same size. Everything is 100 pixels high with 50 pixels of padding. Part of the let's do this, height 100. Like the power of the flex box is really
Yeah, I might have accidentally changed that.
yeah, it's just that sort of the power of the flex box is that it makes it really easy to work with things that aren't uniform sizes, and sort of everything you've got here is uniform sizes. So so you're not, again, it's like the same kind of thing of like, you're not going to really see the effect of the absolute positioning until you give it a top or until you give it coordinate values. You're not really going to see the advantages of a flex box if everything inside it is uniform size. So let's just do
Flexbox, like what you would use for like the grid stack, like the, you know, the galleries that sort of have the different sizes.
yeah, image galleries are one of like, are pretty much the banner application for the Flexbox. Think of things like, say, Etsy or eBay, where they need to display sort of like uniform sized cards for items that are photos of who knows what dimension and who knows what orientation. That's a perfect application of the Flexbox. Is for each of those cards is a flex inside, and then they can just like, they don't have to worry about what the size of, you don't have to worry about what the size of the photo is. You can just go, bam, this will take anything, you know? Okay, so okay, it looks like you also didn't you gave it a class of flex container, but you never wrote a rule for that class. There's nothing in here there's no rule in here tied to that class. So it's not, so Flexbox isn't even activated. As soon as I put display flex on here, notice how it snapped these into a row. I can define either row or column. I can reverse that order. Or I can reverse it, the order in a column. All right, justify is vertical, so and see here, this allows me, like, I can just with one line, I can line up a bunch of items of disparate disparate sizes and just align them easily. But none of that works until you actually turn the Flexbox on. Okay. Oh, wait, we got to look at your, I think I saw this working. Let's, okay, hang on a second here. You've got two rules written for body here. I think that, and this kind of looks like maybe this is just a copy paste typo, but if you want to change all of this stuff, you can just write it all in just one rule like this.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's also, yeah, you also, that's also important to note because you had a, you actually had a missing semicolon in here, or a missing closing bracket. So essentially what you had was this, and then the media query statement was never finished. You know, implicitly, this is what you have. But yeah, if you find yourself writing, this is just kind of generally a rule of thumb. If you find yourself in a position where you've written rules, you know, for a selector, like say you've written body and a bunch of rules, and then later on in your style sheet, you find that you've attached more rules to that same selector somewhere else. You're going to want to merge those into one rule. You don't want to, you want to try and avoid attaching multiple sets of rules to the same selector. There are use cases for that, but again, they're more advanced. They deal with things like state change and stuff like that. At this stage, you would want to just sort of like merge those into one set of rule declarations instead of having multiple ones. So put this back out. So, when we shrink this down, yep, there we go. Font changes and background color changes. Cool. All right. So then this one is this one is Gabriella.
Yeah, I think I messed up this week a lot. Like, I think the only thing I got right was the media query this time.
That's okay. This was a tough one with this was a tough assignment, honestly. Again, positioning is probably the most unintuitive part of CSS, in my opinion. So I expected people to come to class with questions today. So
Yeah, I think there's some of them that just didn't work. And I think like I'm missing some parts of the code.
okay.
But the thing is, I was trying to refer to the video and to search up some of them, but then like my computer keeps crashing. So at one point I couldn't even access the video. So I've been kind of scrambling, and then I feel like some things are missing. That's why like the media query was easier.
Would it be helpful if I posted the videos on YouTube or something like that instead of just leaving them raw files in Google Drive?
Yeah, the thing is like, I think that would be better.
Okay.
I was trying to do this one on my phone, like it was really bad.
Sure. That's fine. It's not that's not too much more work. I can make a YouTube channel for this and upload all that stuff.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. But so I think, okay. All right. Yeah, that's there. Okay. You know, I'm not sure if CSS selectors are case sensitive. Let's try something here. Okay, well, for one thing, you have a class title background color, and then again you have an inline style with a background color. So this inline style is going to completely override whatever's written in here.
Yeah.
Let's just for the moment, let's just put that out. Okay, it is case sensitive. So yeah, okay. So let's look at the positioning stuff first. Okay. Again, yeah, you've done, sort of, there's not, you've set the position, but you haven't given coordinates to these things. So,
Right.
again, it's sort of like, you're not really going to see the effects of these, rules until you add for instance, okay, this is also, you have a typo here. And so let's look at something. One other disadvantage of writing your styles in line like this. If you had written that in here,
Yeah, I think I got confused with which part, like when I was supposed to do in CSS or HTML in this one.
Right, yeah. So style rules, again, style rules almost always go in the style sheet. The only time you should use these inline style tags is if you're expecting these values to change on the fly. Usually you would do that manipulating them in JavaScript. But if if you don't intend for them to change on a user, on like say, if a user clicks or something like that, then you should put them in the style sheet. They should, and so most 99% of the style rules you write are going to go in your style sheet.
Okay.
But again, here, sort of, if you write your CSS in HTML, it doesn't catch that you have a typo here. If you had written it in the style sheet and done format this file, it would have caught that error for you.
Right.
But you can see it here. You can see that when you look at it in the web inspector, you can see that this rule has a warning, and if you click on it, it's like, oh, okay, that's a typo, and now it's valid. So absolute position. Notice that, yeah, so okay, yeah. Again, absolute position is going to keep looking up the parent tree. It's going to look, okay, what does my immediate container, what is the position mode of my immediate container? Is it relative or absolute? No, then I'm going to keep going and going. And so here, what we're doing is and so at this point, it's going all the way to the level of the body, and it's positioning itself. And so when I position this element, 200 pixels means 200 pixels from the top of the page of the body itself.
Right.
I do.
But outside of the container.
Mm-hmm. Whereas if I and it will scroll behind that. Whereas if I turn relative positioning back on in the container, now you can see it's 0 according to the container, the top edge of the container. Your fixed position element is also. Do you have a fixed position element? Oh. Okay. Can you tell what the Can you tell what the issue is here and why these rules aren't applying? Look at this one. And then look at this one. You're missing the equal sign.
Oh.
And so now these rules are in effect. But again, we got to give this thing all right, let's do. Okay. At any rate, so now that it's fixed, but now that that rule is actually in place, you can see that this is, you can see that it's doing what we expect it to do.
Yeah. Okay, I get it now.
Okay, let's look at. Okay, so again here, you set it to flex, and you just kind of it's just doing its defaults.
Okay, so wait, how did, so we said, so we went to align or justify.
Yeah, so I added this flex direction rule. This lets me determine, this lets me explicitly state whether I want a row or a column.
Okay.
This is also where I can set it to where I can reverse the order of that. If I do, by default, this is going to be a row. If I want it a row, if I want to invert the order of this row, I can just do row dash reverse like that.
Okay.
Then I can do I can align them vertically, either let's just center them. Oh, are these all?
Yeah, the whole all the images are in the
Okay,
yeah.
Got it. So they're taking it. All right.
So it's the title and the image.
Right. Okay. Oh, okay. I see. You did do you did individual flex orders. Okay, again, you forgot the equal sign here again. So this class name isn't actually applying.
Okay.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so here, all right, I see what you tried to do. So justify content is a rule that you put on the container, where you put justify content out here. But there are other specific rules that you can define, that you can define at the level of like the individual item. This isn't one of them. So this isn't having any effect.
So this is just for containers.
Yeah, exactly. This is what justify content is governing the behavior of like all of the children. So
right.
So it goes at the container level. Okay, and then let's just see. Okay, yep, your page changes background color when it gets below a certain size. Yep, okay, cool.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay, and then this is Chloe, I think. Excuse me.
Yep, that's mine.
Cool. Okay. Yep. Nice. You've got, yeah, right on. Yeah. You've got a, this is like, you're kind of like inferring the real world application of a fixed position side nav here. Nicely done.
No, well, kind of. I actually like didn't really get the first part of the assignment until we started going over the whole homework just now. Because
Okay.
I did what everyone else did. Like I didn't set a position for, I only set the position, but I did not
Didn't
put,
give it
like,
coordinates. Yeah.
I didn't get the coordinates. Yeah, exactly. And then I started playing around with the coordinates, but I think if you look at the code, there's probably a better way of doing it.
Okay. Well, let's look. So. Okay, you've got a 960 with container. Cool. Okay, no glaring syntax errors because the format button works.
Mhm.
Okay. So box one is this one. Yep. Okay. Box two is absolute positions. Okay. Pizza joints box is, aha, right. So that one pulls off to the side. Yep, makes sense. This one goes here. Fixed. Yep.
So why did one of the boxes get pushed to the right side?
This one?
Yeah.
Well, because you pushed it 500 pixels to the left.
Oh, right. I did that because it was stacked on top of one another. So I
Yep.
wonder, is there like a better way of doing it instead of like playing around with like adjusting the pixels using like left and right?
What do you mean? In order to try in order to do what?
Yeah. So like if the left is not there, it would be stacked on top of some,
Right.
yeah, that content. So in order to align that or like to move the coordinates of that, the only way to do it is through adjusting the left.
Well, if you've got, I mean, you could what's the effect that you're trying to get?
So that it's not stacked on top of
Oh.
box one.
Well, that's what absolute positioning does, is it removes this from document flow, right? So if I take that out and I change this to relative, now it doesn't slide up under this guy, right?
Oh,
but-
right.
But the whole idea behind using absolute positioning is that it ignores the flow of text in the document and positions things just according to just according to the edges of its container. If you don't want the text to overlap on top of other text like this, then the answer is that you don't use absolute positioning in that case.
Okay, got it.
But in this case, the way you did it here works. Like you like sort of, because you've you've ended up getting it to make almost kind of like a masonry layout by pulling this out of the flow of these two, but then off to the side. And then let's look at, okay, your flex box looks good. And let's see, did you do a media query? You did. Okay, so background color, page background should change colors. Well, okay, let's check something. Got the viewport. Okay. Okay. You just changed it from off-white to white. So it's like the
Oh
rule-
yeah, sorry, it was a very subtle change. I should have
yeah,
used, like,
but it
black or
is
something.
working. The color change is working. So or the media query is working. So that's correct. Okay, cool. Nicely done.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, why don't we just take like 5 minutes? Get up, get a glass of water, whatever you want. And at I'll tell you what, let's call it 6 minutes. At 10 to 8, let's come back and we'll start the lecture. Okay, we're back. So, so now that we've kind of gotten through, I think that what we've gotten through thus far is kind of the hardest stuff that we're going to cover with CSS. The especially positioning. That's kind of the single toughest part of the CSS material we're going to cover in this class. But now we're going to start on something more fun. We're going to talk about some of the more sort of visual effects kind of flair that you can get in CSS. We're going to talk about transforms, which are transforms and filters, I should say. And then we're going to talk about using CSS to put animations in your page. There are two ways to do this. There are transitions and there are keyframe animations. So, transforms. What am I talking about when I talk about transforms? Transforms are a family of CSS rules that allow us to change the shape and position of an element without disrupting its position in the flow. Think of them like the kind of transformations you can use in an image editor like Photoshop. So we have things like rotate. We can rotate an element according to a set of angles, or like, degrees. We can skew it, stretch it. We can scale it up and down. We can make it larger or smaller. We can translate, which is to shift the position of it. And then we can also use color filters. So this lets us do things like hue, saturation, brightness, sepia tone, grayscale, all those kind of effects. We can, they're all built into CSS and we can add them really easily. Oh. Okay. Oh, yep, and you can see a complete list of them at Mozilla at the Mozilla Developer Network. But let's look. Let's just look at this part of the example. Let me do this for now. Let me take this stuff out. So I also have okay. Let me take the transitions out. Just take this stuff out. Okay, so here I have a div. There's right now its background image is just an image, and you can see that I have some transforms applied to it. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at these. What kind of things can I do? So if I want to make this larger, Now it's twice as big. 1.5 times as big. But it's still taking up. It's still taking up the same amount of space as is defined in the document as is defined here. So it's got a defined width and height of 88 pixels. What this allows me to do is increase that size, but without taking up that much more space in the document. If I, if instead I changed this to, was it 176, 176? Notice how that sort of like stayed, I've increased the size and it stayed in flow underneath this line of text. Whereas if I then scale this back down, see how essentially you can see that it's taking up, it's still taking up, it's still behaving as if it takes up the full 176 pixels that it did before. We can chain multiple effects together. I can rotate this 45 degrees and now it's rotating. I can skew it. And Chrome gives me these nice widgets that I can play with to set the values. Let's see, what else have we got? Oh, and then okay, so revert turns everything off. But I can do a translate. I have either translate X, translate Y. There is a Z plane as well, but we're just going to focus on 2D effects for this course. So I can either, so if I do translate X, I can move it horizontally. If I do translate Y, I can move it vertically. Oh, but it's the skew that's the skew and the rotate are affecting this. Let's take those out. Right, so now you can see that translate Y is pushing it down. But I can do both of these at once. If I just do translate, and then it takes two values, which are my X and my Y. We've also got those filters. Let's turn these filters on. I can change it to, I can give it a sepia tone, which I can crank up. And I can change the brightness. And so on. Now, this is all well and good. You know, these are some, you know, it is pretty dramatic that we can, you know, that we can really radically shift the appearance, really radically change the appearance of these elements with, like, you know, just a couple of rules, like relatively simply. But where it starts to get really powerful is where we start taking these changes and animating them. So let's move on and talk about that. There are two ways we can achieve using CSS to create motion in a web page or create animation in a web page. There's transitions and there's keyframe animations or just animations. So what's the difference? Both allow you to take CSS properties and animate them. So animate, especially when you animate those transform properties, you can start to get some really wild effects going. But the difference has to do with how they're implemented. Transitions only happen on what we call a state change. So this can mean the difference between, for instance, you've noticed that working with hyperlinks, anchor tags, that they change color when you hover over them, and that we wrote rules that allowed us to define how it should appear when a mouse is hovering, when a mouse cursor is hovering over it. That's what we call a state change, going from base state to modified state, whether that be hover, focus, active, etc. We can also achieve a state change by adding and or removing CSS classes, which we can do using JavaScript. But either way, transitions only occur when there is a base state and a modified state that it can flip back and forth between. So this means that transitions only happen on a user interaction. You set the transition property, which is which property are we going to change? Transition duration, how long is it, or how long is it going to take? And transition timing, how many times is it going to happen? You set this for base state and modified state, or for the two classes that you toggle between. So transitions only happen on a user event, whether the user hovers the cursor over something or clicks on something. An action has to occur in order for a transition to occur. Animations happen regardless of state. So animations, keyframe animations, can happen completely independently of user input. They can just run automatically and run forever, regardless of what your user does. They're defined by setting up what we call tweening points in a keyframes rule, and then when we bind it to a CSS, when we bind those keyframes into a selector, we add properties like animation duration, animation direction, and animation iteration count, as in how many times should it loop, should it run backward and forward, should it how long should each iteration take, and we define those every time we use the animation. So when do we want to use one or the other? If it's something that should only happen on a user interaction, if you're clicking something, hovering over something, and if you want it to toggle back and forth, that most likely constitutes a state change, and you're going to use a transition. CSS transitions just move from start to finish. So like it's just from one state to another, and they only visualize a property change from those 2 points. If you need it to happen independently of user interaction, if you're not involving a state change, if you need it to loop endlessly, or if it's more complicated than what you can accomplish with a transition, that's where you set up an animation. So let's jump over and look at this. Let's add back in some of this other code. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to add I have some rules written. Come on. I have some rules written that only kick in when I hover over that transformer box. So now let's refresh. Come on. Oh, let me do this. Okay, why? Ah. Why is that? Oh. Okay. Wow. All right. I was in that responsive mode, so instead of a cursor, it was simulating touch events, and you can't hover a cursor on an iPad. So, okay. So here we've set up a hover rule declaration, like we have on like we would on say like a hyperlink. But in this case, we're doing a lot more. We're going a lot more in depth with how much we're changing. We're changing the opacity, the text color, which changing the color from transparent to white reveals that there's actually text hiding under here. And you can see as soon as I kick in all of these transforms, the scale and translation and rotate and skew, I hover and this changes very dramatically. But what if I want that to, change instead of instantaneously happening? I want that change to happen over time instead of just like being instantaneous as soon as the hover occurs. This is the perfect use case to set up a transform or a transition. I set transition property, and I can use a comma separated list of which ones I want to change, meaning that I can set some. I can either tell it to just do all, and this will be anything that's different between the base state and the hover state. Notice how now that happens over time with a delay of half a second, a duration of 1 second. Let's crank that up, make it take a little longer. Let's also check out that timing function. So Chrome gives us tools that allow us to very, very specifically define the timing of how this animation should occur. It gives us named ones too. Ease in, out, quadratic, cubic, linear. So this allows us to get subtle differences in the way that these things change. And again, notice that I'm changing all properties that are different, but I don't have to do that. I can just do specific ones. So now what you'll notice is that the shape and position and opacity of the element will happen on that timing, but the sepia filter and the text color will be instantaneous, right? So you can define some pretty crazy behaviors by chaining these things together. And we're still talking about the simple mode of animation. Let's just take a look here. So let me bring this demo text back in. Let's not worry about these yet. So, as we've stated, transitions only happen on a state change. I hover, mouse in, mouse out, right? Mouse in, we go to state, we go to the modified state, mouse out, we go back to the base state. Animations, as you can see the one happening up here as well, these keep happening continuously regardless of state change. So how are these, so what does this animation look like? How do we get that, happen? Spin right, okay. So let's find, okay. So I have an animation called spin right. And here's how I set that up. There's a set of keyframes. The simplest way to set up keyframes, by the way, is just to, you can just do it like as I have going for this marquee, you can just do from and to. That's all you really need. Just a start point and an end point. And the difference here, we can, as opposed to a transition, is that again, it happens completely independently of any user input. It happens on its own and it loops indefinitely. As long as I tell it to, at least. But I go a little more complicated here. What I do here, and notice that it's not just transformations. I can change any CSS property in these keyframes. I'm using the transform to do scaling because it scales smoother than and doesn't disrupt the flow of the document, as opposed to like directly manipulating width and height. But I could do that if I wanted to. And so you can see that here I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 keyframes. And so that spin right animation is cycling through all of those keyframes. It's a bit more manipulated than that, because you can see here, I have it, I can set properties of how that animation should run. that, yeah, this one. Yeah. So outside, so the keyframes are all handled just here in spin right. But notice that it doesn't do anything until I tell it, until I give it a timing function and a duration. This is also, I can write these out as individual properties. I can do animation name, spin right, animation duration, 2 seconds, animation timing function, linear. Now notice that here I haven't specified how many times it should run. That's a property called animation iteration count. So I can tell it to run any number of times, including infinitely. Animation timing function. Okay. I have this animation direction property. And so here, right now, it's just moving. Right now, this is normal. So it just starts from the first keyframe, goes to the value of the last keyframe. It just starts at this set of values, goes to this set of values, and then loops back and starts over. But I can tell it to ping pong back and forth. I can also tell it to ping pong back and forth backwards. So now what's happening when I do alternate reverse is it's starting from here, from the last keyframe, and cycling backwards through them, and then just continuing to ping pong back and forth. Now, we can, if we want, if there is an effect that we want to achieve on a state change, and it's beyond what we can get with transitions, we can use we can trigger animations on a state change. So let's look here. Let's go in. This this span has a class of spin left. So let's go in and find. Notice that here, all the animation properties are defined in the hover state. So so now I get the animation happening, but only when I hover. And it goes away immediately. Now let's also talk about using JavaScript to add and remove classes from an element. I had talked about how we can use this to dynamically create our own state changes. Yes, Sarah.
A question before we move on to JavaScript. So I think I missed this, but in the keyframe spin right in the style sheet.
Yeah.
Why do you have the like? Do you have to break it down by 0%, 33%, 50%?
These are the points of how far through the, how far through the animation I want it to go. Yeah. So you can either, if you don't have this much, you can have as much or as little degree of control here as you want. If you don't want to change this many things at these specific times, that's your decision. That's up to you when you're writing when you're making the animation. But you can also very simply achieve just like the start to finish at the front, just using from and to.
So is 33% like 33% of what?
So if the animation duration is 1 second, 33% is 33% of 1 second. If the animation duration is 10 seconds, 33% is 33% of 10 seconds.
Oh, so that's where it's going to be.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. You can think of this as basically a timeline of events, running from start to finish. And this is just how far along that timeline you want this particular event to occur.
But like you can just do like rotate like 180 degrees and it would rotate 180 degrees, right? Like instead of breaking it down into different percentages?
Well, yes, but it would happen, like, for instance, if I just did,
It would happen really fast.
For instance, you're saying if I just had rotate 0 degrees and I took the rotation out of here each time and just had it rotate like to 90 degrees at the end.
Yeah.
It would do it, but it wouldn't do it on the same timing. Like sort of, you can see that I could, I have, I removed it, but let me just add it back in real quick. So you can see how this kind of like, like it rotates at slightly different speeds in each stage of the animation.
Oh, okay.
That's because it would, if I just had a start of rotate 0 degrees and an end of rotate 90 degrees, it would move smoothly through that whole thing.
Got it. So when you say like 33% of 10 seconds, can you define 10 seconds somewhere or?
Yeah, you do. Using the animation duration property. So,
okay.
So if I go up here to, here in this case, for instance, the animation is takes 16 seconds. So 33% in that case becomes 33% of 16 seconds.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and you can make that. You can either name these on as individual properties like this, or you can make a combination property like this and define a bunch of stuff on one line. So here I have a shorthand that's just animation, and I've given it the name, the duration, the timing function, the iteration count, and the direction, all just on one line.
Does it have to be in that order? Or
I'm not sure. I think it might need to be in that order. Yeah.
Okay.
But you can also write them individually if you find that easier. It takes up more, it takes up more space, but it can be easier to parse. Okay. Cool. So, let's talk about, let's see what's happening here. So we can dynamically add and remove classes in JavaScript. I've got barely any JavaScript in here. All I'm doing, and we'll come back to this in a couple of weeks and actually dissect what this means and what it does. But as is, let's do this. Let's just inspect. let me do this. Let me take this out. So first of all, so watch here in the inspector. Watch right here in the class attribute of this thing. See how a class, how that class of clicked is being added and removed. Now I can let's take the transition out for now. I can change, let me refresh. So now there are style rules added to that class that you know, that are added to this dot clicked class that affect the scale, rotation, and opacity of this element. So essentially, I'm able to build my own custom click behavior and just toggle that class name on and off of this element. And of course, you know, and so in doing so, that constitutes a state change, meaning that I can just transition. I'm doing all here, which just transitions anything that changes between this state and this state. And now we get this spin. Isn't that neat? So you can see how kind of nuts you can get with these animations and with these and with these transitions. Let's go a little bit further even. There's a let's take this stuff out. We can use CSS animations to perform what we call sprite animations. Now, so here, let's look at an image file. Here is a sprite is an image that is a single image file that contains basically multiple frames of an animation. So here, here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 frames of Mario performing a walk cycle. So let's say that, so we have this Mario walk animation cycle. And all we're doing is cycling it from all the way to the left to all the way to the right. So let's see what it looks like. Well, not quite right, does it? But so you can see it's kind of, you know, we're close. We're spinning through, we're kind of pinwheeling through all of these effects, but we can add a property and tell it and tell the animation to do what we call to step through a certain number of times. And we counted that there were 7 frames to the animation, so we can just tell this 7 steps. And it's running backward, so we'll reverse it. And there it is. This can come in really handy for, this technique can come in really handy for things like creating custom loading animations for websites, things like that. Hang on, let me dig up a project that I worked on earlier in the year. It's in my my glitch. Hmm. Oh, well, it's older than that. Aha, okay, got it. So what I have here is two loading animations. This was for a project I was working on. On the right, I have an animated GIF, and on the left, I'm using a sprite sheet and CSS animation. With the right kind of with the right kind of care given to optimizing file size and things like that, this one ended up taking up less, ended up being way more lightweight and faster loading than an animated GIF. It also has the advantage of, say, allowing me to define how fast or how slow I think it should run. So this is in a project that shipped. This is in a thing that this is a real world application of a CSS animation that I included in a real professional project. So that's basically it. Oh, actually, there's one other thing I want to show you. And that is that I want to show you, there's one situation where I find myself using the CSS transform more than any other. And it has to do with centering things in a page. So I have this element. I want it to be dead center in my page. So I do absolute position, 50% left, 50% from the top. But that puts the top left corner in the center of the page. The top edge is 50% from the top of the page, and the left edge is 50% from the left edge of the page. So that has the effect of this top left corner is in the middle of the page, but but that's not what I want. Well, now I can come in and hit it with a transform rule, and now I have something, and I use the translate minus 50% minus 50% to pull it back into the middle of the page. And now this is here, and it's kind of glued into the middle of it's this is fixed in the middle of the page. I can I can resize things. I can scroll things around, put things around this, and it's a pretty bulletproof way to get things centered in the middle of a page. So that's a really common little trick. Okay, so with that said,
I
let's,
have a question
sure.
about the sprite sheet animation. Is it also possible to combine that with a transition? Let's say that I have that PNG sequence and it stays static on just one frame, and only when I hover, it cycles through the
Yeah.
animation.
Yeah, tell you what, let's set that up right now. Let's do. Let's bring the Mario back in. But let's change it so that Mario, let's change it so that Mario only walks when we hover on it. It's actually quite simple to do. All we have to do is move this animation down into here. And now, by default, Mario is standing still, and when we hover, he walks.
Oh, that's really cool. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so if you want to see more cool examples of things that you can do with animation, here's some cool examples. There's like this. These animated birds. Look really smooth. We have some 3D rotating cubes. 3D effects are not going to be within the scope of what we're going to cover. We're going to stick with 2D, but they're doable and they're neat. And this is entirely in CSS. There's no advanced WebGL graphics rendering code or anything running here. And there's also this library, animate.css. Basically, this is a CSS library that has a bunch of stuff just built in or pre-made for you, so that if you just have, if you're working quickly and you don't want to take the time to make a boilerplate animation, you can include this library and just drop these animations in. All you have to do is add some CSS classes into your code, and it'll do all the work for you. And we'll come back to this as well when we're going to do a whole unit, or we're going to do a whole lesson that's about working with external libraries and pulling these kind of libraries into your code and making them work. So we'll come back to that. But just so you know, it's out there. It's out there. Okay, so that's it for this class. For next week, create a new project on Glitch. Use my starter template file. Make one element. Add a transition effect on it. That can I would say use a hover effect, and then add another add an animation to another element. Have that one just loop infinitely. And then also for next week, I'd like you to come up with come up with a concept for your final project. When I say be ready to present it, that sounds more than what I mean. I mean just be ready to tell the class what you're going to build. Okay, so I will, so that's it for class today. I will get the, I'll set up a YouTube channel and start uploading the videos there as well. I'll still put them in Google Drive in case anybody wants to download them or something like that. But plus there's like chat logs and things. But I'll make sure to link a YouTube video, and I will reiterate the assignment, and I'll see you all next week. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good
Thank
night.
you.
Yep.
Bye.